Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this round of Industry Leader Live. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Hilary Cooke, who's a founding partner of Merlin Consultancy. Hilary is an award-winning executive coach, leadership trainer, and facilitator with a special passion for tourism, hospitality, and the leisure sector. She is a fellow of the Institute of Hospitality, as well as being a master in-holder. She holds a PhD in personal development, an MA in human resource strategy, and a research study was centered around leadership in the hospitality industry. Most likely to say, let's give it a go, least likely to say, that's not funny. Hilary, good morning to you.
Good morning, James, and everybody. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks ever so much for joining us today. Just going to ask a few questions, Hilary, if I can. COVID-19, we're right in the middle of this pandemic, is obviously having an impact on our sector and every sector that we work with, but it's also having a big impact on all of us individually. What are your thoughts around that, and what key ways can people cope with that impact?
Oh gosh, I think for me and what I'm experiencing with clients and people, it's the uncertainty and the inability to be able to control things. Yeah, we're operators. We love controlling stuff. We control stuff from morning till night in the operation, and now there's a whole load of stuff that's out of control. So I suppose it's important to focus on the thing. Yeah, it sounds a bit obvious, but focus on the things that you can control and not worry too much about the things that you can't. Because there's an awful lot that is out of our control, and planning is just so hard at the moment. Even planning for Christmas, like, what does that look like right now in October? I have no idea. Whereas usually we've got plans out and menus out and everything.
And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Planning is so important for most of us. We require it to feel comfortable, mental state, mental ability, and then certainly from a leadership perspective, the responsibility of planning is very important, and skills have never been more important to be able to manage that as teams face the current challenges. What are the key considerations you think for leaders at this time, certainly around the planning approach and more broadly to do with managing teams?
I think there's a huge need for a sense of purpose at the moment, to be doing something which is, because we can't control, because the future's a bit uncertain. I think just getting up and coming to work and doing stuff is perhaps not enough. We need to have some sort of purpose. So I think the leader's job in terms of pulling people together and creating an idea of where you're heading and why these things are important, and also checking on how people are really feeling, is really important. There's a huge demand, I think, now for managers and leaders to be a bit more emotionally available than we had to be before.
And I suppose the responsibility of that is so important. Positivity at a really negative time is a very difficult trait to try and instill in people, isn't it? How would you recommend they did that? Positivity, forward thinking, and that kind of thing.
I think it's important to be realistic. So I think if it is positive, be positive. And I think there's a difference between positivity and optimism. So I feel quite optimistic about the future. COVID will be temporary. We'll find a way out of this, and our lovely industry will find a way out of it somehow. But some days I don't feel particularly positive because it's tough going. So I think to separate out the difference between optimism and positivity, and not to feel that you have to be positive all the time, because sometimes you can be more optimistic by facing up to what the worst case scenario could be and knowing that you've got the resilience to cope with that, rather than trying to be positive and kind of missing out on some of the facts.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, certainly within our work and the work that we're doing as an association, we're seeing that there's a need and a propensity to be all things to all people at the moment. Do you see that? Do you think that's a trait and a skill that is being developed during these sort of challenging times?
I see it as a skill set that we can develop. I'm also saying, clinical psychologists calling it the tyranny of positivity. So I think there's positive. It takes a lot of effort, and also while you're being falsely positive, then we're suppressing other feelings. So yeah, I think ability to become more resilient will increase, and to get on with it. You know, this sort of spirit of it is what it is. We can't change it. We've got to do the best with what we've got. I think that's a really important trait, and I think that's a very strengthening thing to be able to do.
And what do you think leaders need to do to be resilient at the moment? Because I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but we see that it's very difficult to plan. We've talked about that. How do you instill that resilience in a leader at the moment when it is so tricky?
I think it's about looking after yourself properly. I think there is a responsibility not to overwork and think you can solve everything and push yourself to burnout. There's something in resilience which is also about recognizing feelings, just recognizing them as they come up because they're telling you something. So using emotion and feelings because they're telling you something rather than because they're good or bad or positive or negative. Emotions aren't positive or negative. We make them so, but actually they're not, they just are. And the data, they tell us something. So I think to be more attuned or as attuned as possible to how we're feeling so that we can manage that feelings process.
And that's really important, isn't it? That we are able to understand the complexities of what's going on at the moment and what our teams are feeling and how they're working. How do you suggest that our leaders best get the best out of their teams at the moment with those sorts of situations?
Yeah, it's tough. And it's tricky because you've got so many individuals. I think it is about having currency at a very individual level because everyone is kind of doing their own thing. They're coming to work. You don't know always what they've left behind at home or who they left behind at home or what complexities there are to be managed in a home situation. And before COVID, we could kind of get by with a fairly superficial view on those things as long as somebody turned up for work in their uniform on time. That was good enough. And if you were really good and really kind, then you push the conversation to be a little bit deeper. But often we'd have Monday mornings with, did you have a good weekend? Yes, thanks, good, now let's crack on. And I've done my fair share of that as well. So I know how that one works when you've got an operation to run. Mm-hmm. But I think that we do need to take more time to check in with people on a personal level and really find out how they are feeling and how they are doing. Because we can take an awful lot for granted and it's quite hard work for some people to just get to work.
And doing things differently as we are now on a Zoom call, having a conversation, different parts of the country. I think, we're needing to adapt, aren't we? We're needing to adapt to find different ways of doing things, but keeping that intrinsic value that you talk about, which is having time for people at the forefront of everything we're doing.
It does, and everything takes more effort. Even, I had to nip up to the road to get some more milk this morning. You can just nipping up the road to get a pint of milk. You've got to remember your face covering. You've got to remember your credit or debit card because you won't take cash. You've got to make sure there's no queue outside. And everything, even the most simple things, require thought and effort. And it's tiring.
Thought and planning, of course, and we're looking ahead to December. You've very kindly offered to be part of our keynote speakers, which we're going to run in December. Thank you very much for that. And you're going to, of course, be sharing insights about the book you've recently launched, Picking Up the Pieces. Tell us about that. Tell us about that book.
Thank you. I wrote it, way back in the summer, in early May and June, as we were closed down and locked in. And I was finding a lot of content online about remote teams and managing remote teams, and there was a lot of advice, and that didn't apply to us in hospitality because we'd furloughed teams and they weren't a team anymore. They've got no purpose because you can't work from home if you're in food and beverage or if you're in accommodation services. You can't work from home, there's no work to do. So we had furloughed hundreds of thousands of people to do nothing. And then come the 4th of July, we want them back, or whenever establishments opened, we want them back, and they need to be, we've got to do more with less. So we've got demand on people. And I just felt that there was something to be said about bringing people back and leading a team and having a strategy for leadership to lead a team that has been really, really disrupted. And people will be coming back from all sorts of different places, 3 months off. Some people loved it, some people hated it, some people couldn't wait to get back to work, some people didn't want to come back to work. It's been life-changing. Yeah, and there was a lot of talk about returning, and I just felt really strongly that we're not returning, we're creating something else.
It's going to be interesting. We'll get hold of a copy of that, and we'll certainly promote that to our members. I think that's a really valuable piece of work. We get questioned a lot, and there's a lot of conversations and networking we have around how to deal with that. So really quite an interesting opportunity. And I see in the background you're promoting those invisible chips.
I swapped them for the book.
We too are supporting Hospitality Action, and thank you for everything you're doing. Tell us a bit about that. I think it's a really interesting initiative.
Hospitality Action's our industry charity for all things to do with wellness and mental wellness. They support in all sorts of ways. So, for example, financial challenges there's a big link between finances and our mental health. If we're worried about money, then it makes a big difference to financial health. And so they've got everything from being able to grant fund people who hit on hard times. And Invisible Chips is a fundraising process for that. So many restaurants and establishments have put their Invisible Chips on the menu. So when you pay your bill, you can buy a portion of Invisible Chips to go with it, and that money gets donated to Hospitality Action. And I'm giving the book away free in return for some Invisible Chips, because I really want to support the industry. We need to, and we're lucky. It's a fabulous benevolent association. We are really lucky as an industry to have it.
Oh, that's fantastic. And we are promoting that opportunity as well through our website and anywhere on our signature strips. If anyone wants to donate, just click on the Hospitality Action button. And thank you very much indeed, Hilary, for everything you're doing, for all the support you're giving us. We really do appreciate that. And we'll look forward to seeing you again in December.
A pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.